started. I'm Chairman Thomas, will be conducting tonight's meeting. I'd like to welcome everybody to the North Ogden City. Oh. We have a mic down. The North Ogden City Planning Commission meeting, October 19th, 2022. It'll be loud for a second while he rehooks up the mic.
Hold on. Don't push hard.
See with the equipment. It's just weird. All right, we'll begin our meeting with an invocation or thought from Commissioner Barker, followed which will be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Commissioner Lund. Commissioner Barker.
Our Father in heaven, we come to give you this planning commission meeting. We're grateful to be able to be here and be able to be of service to North Ogden and the people of the community, and ask me bless to go through this process, that we're mindful of who we are and what we represent and why we're here, and that we'll strive to do those things that would be best for the city, and we say in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
You stand and repeat the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll make note that Commissioner Mason is absent tonight. Commissioner Nancarrow is joining us online. Minutes consideration action to approve the August 3rd, 2022 and September 7th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting minutes. Any corrections or adjustments that need to be made?
No. You need a motion.
Mm-hmm.
I'll make a motion to approve the August 3rd, 2022 planning commission meetings and the September 7th, 2022 planning commission meetings minutes.
I'll second.
Heard a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Do we have anybody online with this? John, besides?
Sandy Cochran's online.
I will read our opening meeting statement. Before each agenda item begins, staff will give a report. After the staff report, the item will be open for other speakers. The applicant will speak first and be allowed up to 10 minutes. Following the applicant, any other interested persons will be allowed to speak for up to 3 minutes. The applicant has final rebuttal time of up to 5 minutes. Any materials that are displayed or referenced, e.g. pictures or written materials, are part of the record and must be left with the commission. Speakers are required to have signed in at the door and will state their name and address before beginning their remarks. If you agree with the previous speaker, then state your agreement to avoid repetitious remarks. Speakers shall address the commission from the podium or microphone and shall address all comments to the planning commission. Please silence your phones. All right, do we have any ex parte communications or conflicts tonight on the agenda? All right, we'll open up for public comment at this time. We've got some public online. If they'd like to address us, just raise your hand in the chat and John will give you access to speak. Nothing? All right. Our first administrative, I guess only administrative item, site plan review 2022-5, consideration and action on an administrative application, site plan approval of the Bowser Bath located at approximately 400 East, 1975 North. Presenter is our planning tech, Kai Johnson. Kai?
Good evening, Chair and Commission. So this isn't necessarily a site plan review that you will be making a decision on. We've already essentially made the decision given the type of business that's going in here. It's a self-contained pet wash. It's approximately 86 or 89 square feet, similar to the storage container, but been modified, not look like them. So we went through what they've provided as far as for their application. The use is not necessarily listed specifically, but fits in that zone. The site development standards, the one question you had is if they were 20 feet from the front property line. They are further than that, so that was why we decided that that could be handled administratively. The proposed building was originally white. They have agreed to put a brown color on it to match to meet the ordinance regarding colors. Regarding parking, if we were to make them bring the parking up to our current city code, they would be required to have 17 parking stalls because there's 4 stalls required for each wash bay. We decided that given the size of the structure being small, it didn't necessarily deem that many parking spaces. So we just had them provide what parking they had on site. I believe that they do have 7 parking stalls available. 2 will be dedicated for the pet wash. John, will you scroll down to the elevations? So they made the top part brown, and they weren't able in their software to do the door, but they're using the white on the left portion of the building as their accent color. The rest of it, I believe, are doing brown. There's the scroll down to their site plan, if you wouldn't mind just kind of showing the parking. So that shows the parking there. I guess really what we're asking is we just wanted to confirm that you feel that we've applied the code correctly in this case.
Okay,
Do you have any questions for me regarding the business?
If I understood you correctly, the main reason we're doing this because of property boundaries.
No. We decided to handle this administratively. If they were to be closer than 20 feet to the front property line, that is to say Washington Boulevard,
Okay,
they could approach the planning commission and have that reduced setback.
so is this a separate business from the car wash?
It is.
Okay,
okay.
It's self-contained, and there will be a building permit application as part of this. We'll ask them to provide probably photos of the changes that they've made before we approve that.
It's sort of like a big red box. So the car wash owner will now collect lease rents off of this Bowser Bath going on the site, which will collect the revenue from the actual site itself. So it's a way to monetize or increase intensity on an existing property. And when we read the site plan ordinance, you've got to meet a certain financial threshold of improvement, or if you're changing impervious from non-impervious to impervious surface that will have an impact on transportation circulation, parking needs, you're going to be reducing landscaping, that sort of thing. Those are items that kick it to the planning commission. But there are things that we feel, you all drive up and down Washington Boulevard, your city. And so when something new pops up, there's things that we just want to basically give you as an FYI, make you aware of. And then the planning commission's consideration in this case, like Kai said, is did we apply our code correctly? Does this, is this with less than 50% of the assessed value of the car wash, thereby keeping it administrative? It's impervious surface for impervious surface. They're sticking it on top of asphalt, so there would be no drainage changes or conditions. And then all of the individual items we deal with, like having a water, hair, grease separator in that drain for our black water that will go out into the sewer, is the same as any tenant remodel. When you might see like over here, crumble cookie going in, would have the same standard requirement in public works during the tenant remodel component. So there's bits and pieces that are administrative, but we want to be, I'd like to be better about bringing forward some of these administrative consent agenda items to the planning commission, just so you're aware of what other work we're doing.
So who's responsible for the business? Is it the red box, Bowser Wash, or is it the car wash?
We'll know who the building and the business license will be under, probably Bowser Bath.
Yeah, I spoke with them today. I didn't ask them that question, but I would assume that the owner of the car wash probably have to be involved in it to some degree, because I believe the owners are out of state.
Yeah, and this is the, I know there's one operating in Roy, there was a Bowser bath that was parked on a trailer in Kaysville City, so I've driven past it, I've actually seen the box itself. But you're gonna start to see these pop up, is my guess.
They're like self-serve.
Okay,
I think there's one in South Ogden in the Macy's parking lot, car lot. Kind of thing, just west of that Macy's.
Okay,
like a car wash.
any questions for Kai or discussion? I don't feel like we needed to see it, but so we trust you guys.
Yeah.
I guess in the
I'm
sense
glad
of
you did.
that would be a Culver. If you guys are wondering if you applied the code correctly, then we ask our city administrator / attorney, and then he can decide if it needs to come before us. So, but thanks anyway. So I guess we take action. We need a motion to approve this site plan review.
Make a motion to approve this site plan review,
2022-5.
2022-5.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Start with Commissioner Nancaro.
Yes.
She muted.
Yes.
Just taking it down.
She's waving her hands at you online, but
No, she's,
Commissioner Watson.
she's giving us a thumbs up. I wonder if, this speak. I
Commissioner,
bet we can hear you now, Commissioner Nantero.
Okay, thanks. Yes.
Commissioner Barker,
Yes,
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Webb.
Yes.
Did I ask you, Commissioner
Yes.
Watson? All right, I vote yes. Have we only had 5 site plan reviews this year?
Probably, yeah, we don't.
Hmm.
do a ton of site
not
plan.
much, is it?
I thought we have that
Did you
many.
say how much is it, or?
No, not much.
I mean, I thought we
We're
usually have
running out of oil.
2 or 3 every 4th of July for the fireworks tents.
Well, we don't review those as a site plan anymore. And
Oh.
there's different tracks. There's business licenses and land use permits that we do process dozens of site plans on, which are more like a really simplistic aerial image of where you're gonna locate items. And we do those regularly, especially with tenant remodels or snow cone shacks and that sort of like temporary use. This elevated to the level of site plan because it's gonna be bolted to the ground. It will be effectively permanent once it's connected to our utilities. That's fairly different from your general pull in and park trailer food service cart or something like that.
Okay. We have no legislative items tonight. So our item 7 is discussion and training item. Training is going to be the complete streets and active transportation in the general plan. Presenter will be our planning director, Scott Hess. Scott?
Thank you. So part of our state required code is that we receive 4 hours of training for planning commission. We somewhat showed you the consent agenda items, so you didn't think all we did was really exciting work. But we also get to deal with hedges on their fences and dog car washes and all the other small items. And we also have $90,000 in UDOT's Planning Technical Assistance Program, Wasatch Front Regional Council's Transportation Land Use Management Program, that is funding an active transportation plan and a wayfinding assignment plan for the city. So you will, as planning commission, ultimately be in the recommending seat at the other end of that process for a general plan component that would be the active transportation plan. And I feel like before that starts, it's a good idea to let you know kind of the ins and outs of what we're going to be looking at, what it constitutes, what it means. And then when you see it, you might have some of these like 101 or basic questions answered. I'm gonna ask a few questions and hopefully we do this sort of in a discussion format and it will count as an hour of training and hopefully won't take us a full hour to go through this. And I just want to thank on the record Hugh Van Wagenen from Wasatch Front Regional Council, who's the active transportation planner at our region, who shared these slides with me and was really helpful to do so. So we'll run through a quick presentation and then, but just by way of question, who knows what the technical, I guess, planning definition of what a complete street would be? who's willing to venture a guess of what complete streets means?
The street profile from property line to property line
Okay, that's a good guess.
and its designation of use.
Johnson?
That it provides a way for auto transportation, walking, walkability, cycling, things like that.
Perfect. So it's that second one, because it's based on use, not the drawing of it. So a complete street by definition in active transportation, not even in active transportation, just complete street generally. It includes that this is a transportation facility for all users. And since 2015, I worked at WFRC at the time, which is kind of interesting. And I was the WFRC project manager that helped with the consultant funding that developed our complete streets policy, our general plan back then in 2015. But North Ogden has had a complete streets policy in the general plan since 2015. And we'll run through it. We'll talk about what has some of the things that have been implemented, maybe because of the complete streets policy, but maybe just because it's the direction that the city was going at the time. And then some of the other items that I think have fallen short because we had a general plan, non-obligatory document. It's really like a recommendation document, not a full policy or procedures document. And so things we can do better this time around when we adopt our active transportation plan to drive towards actual implementation. So bicycle planning 101, John, if you'll go to the next slide.
I thought you took the
I
clicker.
have the power.
Yes.
Okay.
Just so you know, we round up to the nearest 45 minutes
is true.
on an hour, so we've pretty much got our hour, so take the time you need.
We may or may not have a pool at the staff level on how long this meeting will go.
First,
If the big hand catches the little hand, we've taken too long.
we're done. First, just to know, we were funded by Wasatch Front Regional Council. That's our 5-county regional board. They cover 63 cities, including North Ogden. And this is really helpful. And that what their goal with that funding is that the plans support the long-range transportation plan, the regional vision for the state. So who's aware of, or did you receive emails on Monday's meeting from 4 to 6 p.m. of Wasatch Front Regional Council? Did the planning commission receive these emails?
Maybe to our North Ogden email, but
Yeah,
not my.
I'm gonna forward it to you. So we're right in the middle of the adoption cycle for the next 30-year regional transportation plan. And Monday is our small area workshop meeting. We did these last year by Zoom. You may have participated in the past. It's been everyone gets together. So we're gonna have 4.
Is that what's summarizing like the questionnaire that was sent out
Mhm.
before?
Yep. So you'll have a chance on Monday from 4 to 6 p.m. to hear a presentation from WFRC and then provide your comments on roads, active transportation and transit in our area as it relates to long-range funding. The importance of this, just to highlight, is that projects like Washington Boulevard widening are born in the regional transportation plan, or projects like getting Monroe funded with federal transportation funds, or Skyline Drive connection, Mountain Road connection funded by federal transportation funds, are all born in this regional vision. So it's really important to be aware of it, to participate in it. Staff is heavily involved, but I'd love if any of you have time or are able to come down and it would be wonderful. So I'll forward you an email. So this is clicking too fast, and so it killed the joke, but historically in US bicycle planning, we have planned for mammals, which is middle-aged men in lycra. That's the person that you see out on the road. In the 70s, there was a push for what was called vehicular cycling, which is to apply all of the same rules of the road for cars to bikes, and it's kind of the reverse of
It doesn't work. Red lights don't
Red lights
affect
don't
the
apply.
bikes.
Some of the first paved roads on the East Coast were actually paved by cycling clubs that got together and were interested in not having cobblestone streets and having smoother surfaces for riding their bikes. So you can actually think in some ways your really smooth, well-connected road network to bicyclists in the beginning, and now they're kind of like trying to claw back some of this room.
Claim over the Eisenhower. claim to fame?
So the cycling planning that we do now is much more inclusive. This is the thing that we're thinking about in bicycle planning and active transportation planning is the whole life age of cities. So your 8-year-olds to your 80-year-olds and creating mobility options. And it's a lot easier to do that. It's a lot easier to get out on a bike. I was talking to John earlier today about bikes and commuting and e-bikes and the possibility of, ease of getting around town. And with those being so prolific, you make sure that your community is planned in a way that's safe and encourages people to get out of their cars and do what are the majority of trips for the United States household, which are between 1 and 3 miles, and do them on a bike and replace those trips.
E-bikes have really changed that, and I see that on 2600 a lot.
Absolutely, yeah. But what we really end up with, like a bike lane on Washington Boulevard, which I would never turn down because it is helpful to have that, is really for this person here on the end of the spectrum. So a study in 2013, and then it's been confirmed multiple times since then, done by Portland State University, was that the number, when polled, a general population of people, 1% of those people are experienced and confident. They're essentially fearless riders. They'll go out there and ride high-speed roadways. They'll, take the lane. They don't really care. They're going to get their ride done. And that's the head down, butt up cyclists. They're out there for, they either have to be there because they have no other option, or they're there for recreation, commuting. 9% of folks are casual and somewhat confident. They might ride a bike lane on a slower speed facility, like under 35 miles an hour. But the majority of people are this 60% interested but concerned. It's I would ride a bike if I had a safe way to get there. Or I love going down to St. George on vacation and I rent an e-bike because it's so easy to get around there. It's all connected by trails, right? But they can't envision that they can come home and have that in their community. So we really need to be thinking in our active transportation planning about this group of people, the larger percentage of folks. This is too small to read. It's a little bigger on my slide deck here, but generally the active transportation planning process that we'll follow will go, we'll have a steering committee. Before this was, we funded it and we have sent out a request for proposals. We received two. We received 2 proposals back. We're reviewing those proposals. We're creating the steering committee internally with staff and other folks. And once we have a selected consultant, we'll begin this process. But it starts with, what are your existing conditions? We are going to focus on public outreach. We'll analyze the site selection and route selection, look at projects specifically, and then implementation and monitoring. And it's this last piece. We've done a bunch of this work up to this timeframe. We've got a really good trails plan for the city that highlights routes. That was developed in 2015 with public support. We've analyzed some of those routes. We have some goals for some of them, but the thing we don't have is how that translates into our capital facilities planning or other public works planning for how we specifically fund those improvements. And this is facility types based on that, like 60% up to 60% down to the 1% cyclists. So protection level 1 is shared roadways or shoulder bikeways. And this is really road and speed dependent, whether this is a comfortable protection level or less comfortable. Protection level 2 is bike lanes or a buffered bike lane. Buffered bike lanes can be wider, buffered with paint, or you can sometimes do plastic bollards that are bolted to the ground. You can at times move this bike lane into the curb and put the parking lane on the outside. Parked cars make a great visual and physical barrier for cyclists to feel a little bit more comfort on the roadway, even when speeds increase. There's protected bike lanes, that's fully protected lane inside of the parking, and then the multi-use path, fully separated multi-use paths that are the most used. Just looking at like Denver Rio Grande Rail Trail or Ogden Trail Network, our really great canal trail that crosses through the city is used hundreds of times higher than really what we have, the parallel connected sidewalk network. No one's really walking on that. And so focusing on these higher level protection areas, and what you might think of in a community like North Ogden is you're not going to get them everywhere, but you might get a few really good key connections in the city. So focusing that largely, really large infrastructure costs down on a few really specific key corridors. This is like a level of comfort transect that was done with research, and this was in the Salt Lake County's bicycle pedestrian handbook, but essentially as speed increases, the separation increases, which seems really obvious, but it happens a lot faster than you might think. So speed of a neighborhood byway up to 25 miles an hour might be shared road, shared shoulder and bike lane. At 30 miles an hour, you can have a bike lane if there's some like buffered separation, but really beyond 30 miles an hour, which is the majority of our roads, and at least by how fast people really go, it should be that separation level 4, the highest level of separation for cars and bikes. And your likelihood of living through being hit by a car is like on an exponential curve. So if it's under 10 miles an hour, it's really, really high, and 25 miles an hour, it shrinks down, and over 35 miles an hour, it drops to almost 0 on the scale of pedestrians and bikes. So this is based somewhat on psychology, on user experience, on perceived safety, and then also on the reality of just analyzing vehicular and pedestrian accidents. These are some resources. There's actually a resource list, and I can send this out if you're interested in looking through any of the websites that base some of this pedestrian bicycle planning on. And then talking about the possible outcomes of our application that we have. One will be a map with prioritized projects, both linear projects, so trail connections, on-street connections, and points. Those might be intersection improvements or trailheads, or other specific point of references like getting to a park or other neighborhood amenity. Identifying some funding options for how we might build these things. Looking at recommended code changes to really drive implementation. Potential for education and engagement programs for youth and adults. The Bike Utah, our state's nonprofit organization, provides bike rodeos. They'll bring helmets out. They'll teach kids the rules of the road. They'll, try to get people interested in that. And I don't know if we've ever done, as part of like Cherry Days, a bike rodeo, but that would be a great captive audience to have something like this. Sometimes you talk about wayfinding and signage. We actually have funding specific for wayfinding and signage, which would be consistent signage across the city, consistent signage, say at the canal trail. I mean, this might seem obvious to you if you've lived in the city for a long time, but I would bet there are hundreds of residents that drive up and down the road and don't realize that the trail that they pass every single day connects as far west and as far east as it does. And even when they drive 1050 versus 4th East, they might not realize that's the same connected piece of trail network. So having consistent signage, consistently named signage. And one thing that's really, really helpful is using like a university map, or hospital campuses do this, but the point on the map and it says you're a 15-minute walk from here to here. And that, you can walk further in 15 minutes than you might think you can. And if you're on a safe, comfortable, connected trail network, you might be encouraged to walk out of your front door, down the trail, into the park. Some other civic resource that you didn't realize that you could actually access easily, because you didn't know how long it's going to take you. And a lot of people aren't that curious to go out and find out. So really looking forward to the wayfinding and signage that we're going to have. And then the potential for a maintenance plan. So one thing with our active transportation plan we're going to bring together is public works, parks, and planning staff, so that we'll have people who are going to maintain these facilities in the discussions of how we create them. And having Eric Casperson from Salt Lake City here now is a huge resource, because he designed and implemented a bunch of these for Salt Lake. And listening to the engineer talk about buffered bike lanes and protected bike lanes as, oh yeah, that was our dedicated snow storage, which is actually, it's okay, because what it is it's an engineering solution that can be justifiably sold to a public works crew to build a facility that on the far end of the maintenance schedule turned into a side-by-side piece of equipment with a snowplow. And I've heard tales of Third South and Salt Lake City having the protected bike lane plowed before the street gets plowed. So I've had people say, I got to wherever I was going by bike before the street was ever plowed. So there's cars stuck in the road and they're cruising down the bike lane because of just the timing and schedule of different plow drivers. But he's a huge resource to have just because he has so much big city experience in building these facilities that we really haven't dealt a lot with in Ogden, North Ogden. Ogden being the Grant Street Promenade just now kind of coming to completion and then getting their green bike share stuff going in Ogden. So last is this list of resources. Wasatch Bike Plan is kind of interesting, John. I don't know if you hit control, if you click on that one. But back in 2015, when I started as the active transportation planner, Salt Lake, Davis, and Weber counties were really, really far behind the region in bicycle planning. So if you zoom out just a little, because that's showing Salt Lake and Weber, as it scrolls through, that little lower kind of crescent shape is Utah County. And in 2015, that was entirely green. So they all had active transportation plans down here, but as you scroll up north, these were not populated with green. And I thought, I don't see that left right here, John, that says scroll to see our progress. One of these, scroll down there. Okay, here you go. It's going to populate through. So this is 2015 to today, and it's that's what it looked like, was empty in 2015. And then today, green means done, yellow is plans in progress. So ours pops up here in 2021, up in there. And it's been pretty incredible to see the traction that active transportation planning has had across the region, what it's meant for connected facilities. You can now ride from the mouth of Ogden Canyon down a connected network of trails to Bridaldale Falls on what's called the Golden Spoke Network. And that is planned to go north up all the way into Brigham City 2 on the old Denver Rio Grande Rail Line corridor and using the canal trail. Not our canal trail, because it's all west, like Harrisville, Pleasant View. But you have these spokes, hub and spoke trails that come off of it. So how does Pleasant View plan a connection that goes from Smith and Edwards through Pleasant View, picks up the canal trail and gets you all the way down to Coldwater Creek, for instance? So you could ride from Coldwater Canyon out around the canal trail and then down, 140 miles to Bridaldale Falls. And it's a pretty incredible, ribbon of connected facilities that has come together mostly through implementation of like one really easy to focus on active transportation resource, but the planning around it has been great to see, and really encouraging the last 7 years to see the number of plans that have been developed and implemented. And now we'll have ours pick up here in North Ogden next year. So that's active transportation planning generally. And look, they just touched.
Yeah, see, we're over time. But
I'll show you one more quickly, and then we can have any discussion about it. But within our general plan, we have a complete streets policy. And I don't want to call it a policy, it's more like a complete streets section within the general plan, because a policy to me would say it's been adopted into our public works standards and guidelines. And it's the difference between, we might desire street trees everywhere, but the zoning code says we only have to do them under these specific circumstances, right? So same thing with the complete streets policy. So if you can pull up the general plan.
Oh, our general plan.
Our general plan, yeah, the link to the general plan, and it's page 37, and I know you've all read this. It's only 386 combined pages. So I expect you all to read the whole thing before we start going through it. But
Is it on the slide, the link?
no, I sent in the email I sent you had just a click the link to this. So if you can't pull it up, it's okay. But a complete street integrates diverse modes of transportation in a way that benefits the widest portion of the city's population as possible. And the nice thing about using complete streets as the lens you look at things through is that Washington Boulevard with or without maybe a bike lane and a wide sidewalk could be constituted as a complete street. It doesn't mean every single road has every single thing on it. What it really should be is more like complete street networks. So maybe you end up with Monroe being ultimately a safer, more separated bicycle facility that's internal to our community and picks up more residential uses, but isn't designed to heavy or to carry heavy truck traffic, or isn't going to be a future transit resource, and isn't even designed to be. Same with our neighborhood roads. Those can be pared way down, so it almost restricts in some ways like heavy truck traffic or vehicular travel, but they're designed to feel really comfortable for those people walking and utilizing the neighborhood road connections. And we got all sorts, you can add street tree elements into this, so urban forestry, you can do dark sky elements. It really depends on what your community wants to focus on for what complete streets means. But interesting that we've had this in here, since 2015, and some of the wins that I'll point out here is it talks about sidewalk changes. So our public works standard has changed. We now have a 5-foot wide sidewalk standard everywhere. It used to be 4 feet. We've talked a lot internally about restoring connectivity to communities, areas, specifically sidewalks around elementary schools and how those can connect. That's highlighted here. And what a complete streets policy, when adopted by Public Works, what it would do is establish at what level of investment in a road you reconsider everything. So this isn't like, you're not white sheet of paper every time you do an overlay on a piece of asphalt. But at the time that you do an overlay, if you're going to repaint that street, you might consider what's our on-street parking need, what's our bicycle lane parking need, and should we put the stripes back into a different configuration? On a mill and fill, which is they've come in and they've ground off a few inches of asphalt and overlay a fresh layer of asphalt on the road. That is a federal trigger for correcting your ADA ramps at all of your intersections. So if you have a road that you're mill and filling that doesn't have ADA curb cuts, you're going to have them at the end of that project. So that's like a kind of the lowest level of federal complete streets policy that's infiltrated and worked in. And then when you're doing a major road reconstruction like Washington Boulevard, or if we were to use federal funds to construct Monroe Boulevard, that's when you really get to consider what's the curb to curb face width, what do the sidewalks look like, do we have an above the street connection, do we have below, within the street. And we had that conversation pretty heavily about Mountain Road here, right? Mountain Road cross section looks like a sidewalk on the south side, on the downhill side.
Yeah, it just depends on which part.
Yeah, the road with bike lanes and then a separated trail. But Eric, what you just said is really important. It depends on which part. And now what do we have? A trail network that will kind of enter into an existing sidewalk network. And what does that look like for other developers going down the line? And our complete street policy can be a place to have some of these conversations and certainly our active transportation plan. So they're interesting. They're fun things that are coming, fun planning items that are coming that are a little bit out of the realm of just your normal subdivisions. And I spent 5 years living in this world. I love it. I was a bike commuter and really interested in seeing neighborhoods connect and come together. So if you have any questions, I want to be a resource, so we can point you to Wasatch Front Regional Council and keep going up. So it's right above the goals. And John's just getting to it now. So page 34 is where the actual complete streets policy begins. So right there. So there's complete streets policy embedded into the general plan. And it's worth reading through a few pages on this. It's only 3 or 4 pages of the general plan, starting on page 36. And it really, our general plan is a very aspirational document, which is good, but I don't know that that's translating down to some of the projects that we're actually getting the implementation. And one of the goals of the city that I was given is we want to shorten the general plan. We want to make it long enough that it says what we needed to say, but short enough someone might actually be willing to open it and flip through it and see pieces that are interesting to them. So I think it's definitely too heavy on the words And if we can tease out all of these really important aspirational elements and shrink the document way down and get to the point, I think you'll have more residents, more people engaged and actually read it. Great. So that's basically everything I have for you from a presentation standpoint, and happy to take any questions or discussion.
Is this looking at modified streets as we go along, or just from here into the future?
Yeah, if we adopt a complete streets policy, it'd be, my goal would be to adopt that and the active transportation plan into the public works standards. So that everybody's on the same page and they know that when we touch 10, 15 in the future, we either restore the bike lanes that are there or we enhance them. You know, maybe we look at ways to make them a buffer bike lane in the future.
Because there's a lot of streets that just aren't good for bikes, but people still bike them. There's no shoulder whatsoever. Are those looking to be modified, or just like Fruitland Drive and Mountain Road? Those are not good for bicyclists. They're not good for walkers. And I've not hit people on there before.
You know, Fruitland's a good example of a road that has a history in the city of being a country road that creates a community feel.
Mhm.
And maybe we look at not doing standard sidewalks above curb on Fruitland. Maybe it's an asphalt trail along Fruitland on the single
Okay.
side or something like that. We would encourage people to get out the way Pleasant View Drive has that asphalt trail.
Mhm.
And that's a trade-off. But I think that we get not stuck in, but we kind of get the idea that every road as it improves over time will always be sidewalk, curb, gutter, full road improvements, and they can look like whatever our vision for the future is.
Okay. Yeah, not indicating my age, but Fruitland Drive and Mountain Road, those bicycles, I used to bicycle all the time, but there's no traffic.
But you kept getting stuck in the mud because it wasn't paved yet.
No, as after that time, I come along about a week later. I didn't even ride no horses on those streets. You can't do that.
Yeah, steel
A lot
steel
of horses.
tired bikes,
Yeah, that's
one big wheel in the front, one little in the back.
right. I had to chain up my bike. to get it out of the mud. I had chains on my bicycle back then.
Okay, any questions for our planning director on his passion for bicycle lanes?
Hey, I'm right there with him. I think it's great.
Well, I just have to say 50% of our community could be a bike community, the rest
Oh, yeah.
is
True.
a
E-bikes are
long
changing
shot.
that a lot, though.
They
A
are.
lot.
Yeah, my kid comes down this way all the time on his.
And they're getting fast too. Not
When they can go
slow
back up the
down.
hill without having to pedal, then all of a sudden.
So yesterday, I was going on Harrison, coming up that hill from the canyon.
12th
And
Street
there was a
there.
guy,
Yeah.
from 12th Street, and there was a guy not pedaling, going up that hill.
I'm doing 40 miles an hour.
Probably, yeah, up that, I mean, and talk about a busy road and a
Uh-huh.
section where people speed up.
Yeah,
But it really is that and high school mountain biking teams. The number of people on trails, the number of people using bikes to get around, things are really changing.
And the prices are getting better too.
Yeah, there's just more volume out there. Hunters are using e-bikes and,
the more and more DUIs, the more and more e-bikes you see.
yeah, oh, yeah.
We have to have DUIs on bicycles, huh?
Probably eventually.
I passed the guy in Washington doing 42 miles an hour on a scooter. Like a little electric scooter. He was tucked down because I pulled up next to him and paced him to see how, because I'm like, that's incredible. How fast is that thing going? And I'm just like, no. You don't have your license? You don't have your license.
I was just gonna agree with Scott that I like the bike lanes, but for a different reason. I want those people out of my lane.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
I
just gotta go by.
Road
and-
bike.
They
and
want to be
everything.
out of your lane, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
I was gonna say it's a two-way street, but you know what I mean, they want to be out of that lane too, and I think that the more and more, I mean, they're just gonna get more and more accepted, there's gonna be more of them. I watched my corner all day and there's people of every age group and ability on those bikes.
Yeah.
Maybe some that shouldn't be, but
totally.
we gotta, we gotta be aware of that, and I think that's gonna change.
Yeah, I'm trying to teach my kids, grandkids how to ride roads. I finally got them on the Bog River Parkway. They can handle the bicycles really well. Now I gotta teach them, how do you ride a road? Like, makes me a little nervous. I'll
Well,
probably give them all these.
I'm most concerned about getting our streets connected.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
so,
Uh, Anyway, I mean, if we got a plea for funding to at least finish Mountain Road / Skyline Road. I mean, as the development has happened, we got two sections that are, well, I guess one section that's getting built right now and one section that's escrowed for the intersection, but we're just getting to a point where we have a couple little gaps that might sit for a long time, so we need to seek funding to probably take it on ourselves to
Those
close it.
landowners would just make those connections.
I know one of them who's made the offer.
Make sure you're there on Monday, 6 p.m. and tell the regional council that road's a priority. Because I think Mountain Road, really anything that's outside of Ogden and Beaver County right now, we're more like phase 2 and 3 of the funding cycle. The transportation plan will run from 2023 to 2050. So it's almost 30 years and it's like 10-year chunks. So
Yeah.
phase 1 is 2023 to 30, and then 30 to 40, 40 to 50. So to be competitive in some of those funds, we're not even going to be competitive for 7+ years.
Well, and Skyline for Pleasant View, they've been fighting for that and got some funding, and then they'll be pushing for their next phase, but I mean, in all reality, if it's gonna cost $5 million to build their road, Skyline through there, another $1 million connects all the gaps between North Ogden to make it complete. And that really would be something ideal to do all together.
I think their request to Wacog was 15 million.
So you got Monroe Boulevard too.
Yeah, well, and
Good.
I know when they thought we were gonna build it, and I was there when they did their bid opening or their discussion, and I think that's what Parsons bid was $5 million, but it wasn't complete the street, but it was get that main cut from through the hillside done.
They've had to, and they redesigned it. That's required more cuts, more, and it's
Just
the price is
more
going up. Plus,
complicated.
it's 3 years later, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right, that if they're gonna invest in that, they should invest in the corridor all the way.
Yeah, it's not very much more money to add 3 more miles of connection, which is, I mean, essentially then completes the loop from wherever you want, Weber State University all the way to Smith and Edwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, Vikings will be there.
Because there was a few places that we have
On
that
that corner.
really, I mean, the missing link that's above the Hollis's property, there's probably not any development that's gonna happen there in the next 50 years, so that's gonna be, unless they sell their house and move, but because you really can't do much above there. So there's little gaps that's really gonna be on us to probably get it to complete.
And then on the other smaller scale infrastructure, you should touch, I mean, I don't know if this in a city our size, but you should touch every piece of road in your city within about 10 years. So within 10 years, every piece of asphalt has had a mill and fill or a skim coat or a seal coat. Something has happened within 10 years.
We're on a 25-year plan.
And it might be,
We're getting
but
better. We're getting better.
It used to be 50, so we're twice as often as we used to be.
But in doing that, I mean, Salt Lake City built an incredible amount of bicycle infrastructure over about 15 years, just chasing the pavers around. And so Dan Bergenthal in transportation, he's done some presentations on this, but he basically just infiltrated the public works department. And so every project, he would just go through their capital facilities project list. Anything that was even like a basic seal coat that required paint to go back down on the street, he would push for a little more paint or a little bit narrowing of the lanes or a wider shoulder, or hey, this one never had paint on it, let's throw a fog line on or something along that line, and picked up just an incredible amount of infrastructure for essentially free over time, just being patient and making sure that someone's at the table to discuss this stuff. Every road project coming in. So we'll do our best. And then your 42-mile-an-hour scooter guy can get a ticket.
Yeah,
On.
I was impressed. I mean, that guy goes down, he's done.
Yeah.
That speed, on a wheel that's 3 inches around.
Just living on the edge.
It's like, man.
Buy those bearings.
All right. Now for public comments, we have any?
We do not have any attendees anymore.
Okay,
They shall have to upgrade. the
planning
police
commissioners,
radar.
any remarks?
They'll have to upgrade the police radar to pick up those bicyclists
Yeah,
and those.
Uh,
scooters.
last week I attended the city council meeting, the retaining wall. Grading portion of plan went through, council tabled it, wanted more information. They were leaning towards. What were they leaning towards, Scott, more, less,
Let's call it.
Less regulation?
flexible Or creative options, maybe.
yeah,
So looking at maybe landscaping or aesthetics on the walls as they relate to height.
because they were more down the lines of. Height, if height's regulated, it's because of safety, not because of aesthetics, so. The one particular wall that we've been talking about was 10 feet or 11 feet tall. You know, they were of the opinion, well, if you plant shrubs in front of it, and you only see 8 feet of the wall, then what's the big deal? Because it's engineered to be safe at 11 feet, so why?
Yeah.
Are we regulating that it can only be 8 if it's safe? And so,
So I said, why can't we make houses 50 feet tall and you can just plant pine trees in front of them? We'll only measure what's above the pine tree.
There you go.
yeah, except for the 35 feet of house started from the fire department
Well,
as a
that's-
safety thing. They don't
Oh,
have,
is
a-
that where?
they don't have a ladder truck. Huh?
Oh.
Yeah, because they don't have ladder trucks. That was as high as they felt like they could fight a fire.
I feel
So
so.
that's
much
where
better
it
now about that
came
statement.
from.
Thank you.
So
The other.
we get a ladder truck, fire department, we can't have 50-foot houses. Let's.
The other direction they were going was if your neighbors are okay with it type of direction. That really only works for the first time that decision's been made and then someone sells their house. Or the other thing is, as a neighbor, you might feel obligated to keep friendly neighbor, you know, even if you didn't want it. So this is gonna be in my comments, but November 2nd, there's a joint work session between the planning commission and the city council. We opted to have the city council come to your meeting because it was at their request for a work session. And we're gonna provide you with, I think the direction staff is going to go is 3 options. So one is the staff and planning commission recommended no change, or really the change of 8 feet and then 8 feet for boulder walls. And then provide 2 tracks. So one might be just settling on a number we can all live with. And option 3, some more nuanced approach, like average heights of walls or something along that line in the code, because the wall we've been talking about runs from about 6 feet exposed to 11 back to 8. So on the average of the length of the wall, we may be able to call it, you know, 8 or 10 feet or something exposed, but we don't have a code section.
The issue that rubs everybody uniformly equal is the fact that this wall we're talking about was built after we already had the regulations. So it was like, no, it's not like this. Oh, now how are we making an exception? It was kind of like the city got the bird, built the wall, and then, hey,
Yeah.
now you guys need to fix it because
Yeah.
they held it. So that is what everybody has a little bit of heartburn trying to say, well, we fixing it for this. No, we don't want to, but it's just created the conversation for everybody to really address it.
I think if your neighbor's okay with the thing, I think that needs to be looked at a little more closely. I could see why an elected official would be more amenable to looking at that, whereas a lot of other people in the city would have heartburn over that one. I think.
Well, but also sometimes, you know, there's a lot of houses that get built into the hillside.
Sure.
And I mean, my house in particular, I could put a 14-foot wall behind my house right now just to get back to native grade.
Mhm.
I'm the only one looking at it. I don't want a wall that tall, so I'm not building one that
Yeah.
way. But in theory, there is a lot of houses that will dig into the hillside
Yeah.
and they're the only ones looking at the wall.
Yeah, and I think that's different than, you know,
And so
putting the onus on a neighbor to say, well,
Yeah.
you sign this thing and then the city is gonna allow me to do it. I just think that's a slippery slope that elected officials might look at that differently than city employees or even a planning commission would. I think that's something to be noted.
Yeah, you don't want to put the burden on that other than the one wall we're talking about, then one neighbor wants that.
Yeah,
So it's kind of, well,
yeah,
I don't,
he keeps coming.
yeah, who knows? And maybe he just that way because he's pushing, who knows? But
And some neighbors might just, if the solution is regrading of your neighbor's property, the neighbor might want their property to be left alone at, more than their disagreement with the height of the wall that's adjacent to their property.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's what's happening in this particular case, but it's one of those, it's an interesting case, neighbor to neighbor. I mean, they might say, I like my amenity that I have in my landscaping that predated the wall, so I'm willing to accept a wall that's 3 feet taller than code in order to be left whole and, ignored essentially. For staff's side of this whole thing, it comes down a little bit to the ability to administer the ordinance. And so looking at aesthetics, that's great. Again, it works really well when you plant that row of boxwood bushes up front, but you go through a drought, those die. We don't even have code enforcement to go after our most obvious items or like dead trees or something, things that we're having in our commercial districts on roadways that our 20,000 population is literally seeing every day, let alone onesie twosie individual property owners. So I think that those bushes die and then there's no enforcement arm to get them replanted in the future. And then that wall just exists forever. So,
but again, that's where you come into the aesthetics of it. It's like, well, we don't need to govern people's landscaping down the, But anyway, yeah, and I actually made the remark, I think I did here in planning commission, but when I explained our thoughts on it, I had mentioned that of ways to help the building department and the city engineer, and saying, because I brought up the fact that I've seen a lot of 4-foot walls, boulder walls that would fail because they're built out of little rocks.
Yeah.
And said, maybe it's more like engineering is required, 3 rocks and above engineering is mandated, and that, so that way, even if it's a 4-foot wall and it's got 5 rows of rocks, they could say, hey, you need to have that looked at, and versus just pulling out a tape measure and saying, oh, well, it meets, it works, but.
Yeah, after reflecting on the discussion, I like that engineering requirement when it fits, whatever staff kind of recommends.
and our building department said that would actually be a way to administer that. We had support at the building department who goes out and actually sees these walls on site, especially for something like an 8-foot wall. So yeah, if they're 2.5 or almost 3-foot rocks, I'm okay with them being 8 feet tall.
Yeah, I mean, so not that I want everybody to pick apart what my guys do, but we're building a series of walls in the cove right now. And they're all about 2 rocks per row, but they're like 5 to 6 feet tall because the bottom rock is 4 to 5 feet.
Yeah.
And then there's the rock on top of it. And then there's a terrace. And it goes up to the front of the house. And, that's much different than when you look at another wall that's 3 terraces and there's 30 rows of rocks in it. You're like, ooh, that's not gonna
Bowling
also
balls.
stay there, but
Yeah.
anyway. Any other comments? Scott, nothing else? John,
Nope,
really? Not even like planning a Christmas party yet or anything?
it's December 6th. Sorry, I
See?
thought we-
Plan.
So bring you and a friend. There's a survey that went to your emails to RSVP. We need to know by November 21st. So, yeah, and there's quite a few good options.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. All right,
We adjourn.
motion to adjourn,
I'll second it.
motion and second, all in favor?